Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's interview. My name is Julie Goldstein, and I'm honored to be interviewing Deanna Morse, who is one of the judges for this year's festival. Um, a little background on me: I'm an associate professor in film and video production at Grand Valley State University, specializing in animation and new media, and an experimental filmmaker at heart, working on in a range of mediums, really exploring the creative process through experimental film. And Deanna here, I actually is a mentor of mine. I feel like I'm following in her footsteps. She taught at Grand Valley also for 33 years, and she has produced and directed and animated over 100 short film poems. She is active participant as a maker, a creator, and a community member. She is a president of AAFF International, an international animation organization that we'll talk about. She's also been producing, as I mentioned, a prolific body of work. Her work is in the collection at the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She's also in a range of other collections. She's showed in a range of film festivals. We'll talk about her work. She's also a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Sciences and has been an active judge in the animated short category for them. And she graduated from Iowa State, and her career has been a winding path through the evolving media. Was involved in early computer animation, generating some very unique content with evolving media at that time. She also was involved in generating graphics for animation, for Sesame Street animation that I remember watching when I was a child. And really, setting the framework for visual poetry and sort of the blend between animation and experimental film. Her early work, uh, had live action components to it, but those live action components really come together in her body of work, which she's launched a new website that we'll be talking about, and she's also generated a range of distributable content, and her DVD Move Click Move from 2001 was an award-winning representation of her work. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Deanna to sort of talk to us a little bit about this amazing trajectory of a career that she's had, and how it all started, because it looks like you went to school at Iowa State and a degree in telecommunication arts. Can you talk a little bit about your early education before you went to grad school at the Art Institute of Chicago and sort of reacclimated yourself with your work?
Yeah, thanks. When Iowa State was really an agriculture college, but at one point there, and I changed my major about 20 times, but at one point I was an art student, and all the way through college I studied arts, and I became very interested in what you could do with different forms of art, like what you could do with a painting versus what you could do with a sculpture versus what you do in woodworking. Like how did the materials and the techniques shape what your output was or what you could say with that media. And then at one point I took a film class and I just got hooked. I decided that film was the uber art. It had all the elements of arts that we care about. It had graphics, it had music or sound, it had time, it had motion, it had emotional range that you could pull people into, and I got hooked. And in terms of animation, there weren't schools of animation at that time, and there were very few animators, even in America. In the world, we all kind of knew each other once I got into animation. But how I became an animator was I took a film class where we had an opportunity to do a reverse storyboard. And we grabbed a TV commercial out of a box, and the one that I got was the Pillsbury Doughboy. So I took it back and I realized to my dorm, I'm like, I don't know how they made that doughboy move. And I asked my friends, and nobody knew how they made that little puppet move. And then I did some research and I realized it was just this thing of move the doughboy a little bit, get your hand out, click, move, click, move, click, move, click. At 1,440 times a minute, you were moving and clicking, but creating the animation by doing those small motions and clicking. And it turned out that my telecommunications department had an animation stand on the third floor that nobody was using. And so I asked if I could use it, and they let me stay overnight one weekend. And I did some move, click, move, click, move, click. And when the film got developed, a week later, and it came back, and those little circles that I had moved and clicked had a life of their own. That was it. I was hooked. And that's really what's kept me going as an animator my whole life, is that experience of moving and clicking things under the camera and then seeing it come alive.
Truly a conversation with the medium itself, and the name of your award-winning DVD, Move, Click, Move. So in your early work, you did some live action work as well. Did you do live action? I see you in the 70s. Some of your early work is part of the Filmmakers Co-op, which is really quite amazing also to be in that collection. Um, yeah, can you talk a little bit?
Yeah, I was live action filmmaking, and I actually applied a lot of that to animation. My heart is in editing, and so frequently what I would do in making an experimental film is I would gather a lot of material, see what kind of resonated with me, and then edit it. It's the opposite of the way that they do commercial films, where they have a storyboard and they only create the animation that they need for the project. My approach is more like a sketchbook approach, where you create a lot of material and then you see what makes sense and you pull it together and you edit it.
Mhm.
And I think that's your approach too, Julie,
Yeah.
where you generate a lot of material and then pull it together in
Yeah.
editing. You have that same sort of framework, I think, to your
Yeah,
films.
yeah, different experiments that we can, yeah, generate new
Mhm.
content with. So yeah, so thank you for sort of recognizing that. And on that note, I really want to recognize some of your early work, not only in live action and filmmaking in general, but in animation. And you've been doing animation since the 70s, and you've been working in a range of mediums: computer animation, stop motion animation, some drawn animation. Can you talk a little bit about how things have changed in some of your earlier experiences?
Well, it's interesting because I do like this physical experience of working under the camera, but computer animation came in to everyone's, it was everywhere. And so at one point I had to jump to computer animation, and I put it off for a long time because I didn't want to be a programmer. And that was, for a long time, that was the big debate in computer animation, is, do you have to learn to code, or can you just be an animator? And you had to learn to code, really. And so I put it off for a long time, and then I went and studied computer animation in Canada at an international summer camp, really, that was a 4-month program at Sheridan College. And when I got there, I thought I had put that off enough years that I would be able to use a mouse or a cursor, but there was no mouse, no cursor, so it was still all code. And so I did learn programming, and I learned computer animation in that way. I went back to graduate school when I was in my 50s, so that I could learn computer animation. That's when I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and was in their art and technology program. You went there
Hmm.
too,
Yep,
right?
yep, we just missed each other. Yep. Yep.
Were you in art and tech, or were you in
I was in
animation?
filmmaking. My thesis was 16 millimeter. Actually, won an award at Ann Arbor years ago. Circular ruins, clay animation. Yeah.
That's
But I
cool.
dabbled in the computer as well. I went back to grad school to learn about the computer too. And one of your early works in computer animation has had a resurgence now as well, right? On the cover of your
Yeah, this
website.
film Plants.
Hmm.
Yeah, this film Plants that I made, I forgot what year, 84 or something like that. And basically it is that approach of I sketched out plants with code, with the computer, designed them and then strung them all together in an animation. And and the kind of pivotal thing was I found a paper that I had made when I was a child, when I was maybe, I don't know, 5 years, 8 years old, where I was talking about plants and how they don't move, they don't talk, they don't walk. And I'm like, yeah, we just work on the same themes our whole life, which is kind of true. And after all this heavy work in computer animation, too, I did an early, one of film I made, Sand Paintings, was one of the first motion capture films, definitely the first independent motion capture films, used a data glove that we got from young Harville, who was working at Body Electric at that point. But after all that computer work, I've kind of come back to wanting to do stuff by hand, like under the camera, something that I can touch, that's tactile.
Hmm.
Um, Although, as you know, about 2 months ago, you became this cheerleader to me about AI, and you were so energetic about what you've been doing with AI that it dragged me into the AI world. And I haven't finished anything with AI like you have. I know you've been making a lot of work with AI, but I've been using that as a tool now too to generate images. And I've made about maybe 50 sketches or 500, I don't know, with AI, but only one or two of them has really made me gasp.
Hmm.
But it has a real potential, I think, too, as a tool for animation.
Yeah, a whole new medium for us to explore, to experiment with. And with your career in animation, 33, 34 years at Grand Valley State University teaching animation, and you sort of a lifelong teacher, and now the president of ASIFA International and Animation Workshop Group. Do you want to talk a little bit about sort of that trajectory of your career in terms of education?
Well, yes, I've always been involved in the community, and partly because I didn't live in a city where there were a lot of peeps, a lot of animators or other professionals like me. Like I was the only animator in Grand Rapids, Michigan, for
Hmm.
decades. So I didn't have a community, and the way that I would get community would be to join professional organizations and also then take leadership positions in those organizations. I did it with SIGGRAPH. I did it with the filmmakers. The independent AIVF, Association of Independent Film and Video Makers, in the 70s, and then ASIFA, the International Animation Association. That and that group for me is so important because it really works to consider how we can communicate across borders, connect people to people. And animation, like music, is really kind of a universal visual language. It's a universal language that can communicate across borders and across languages. It's not perfect, of course, because we have specific visual codes that are tied to our international identities, but it's the closest thing we have probably to Esperanto. And I love the idea that we can use our art to communicate across borders. And the goal of all of this isn't commodification, it's to create connections with people, to build relationships, and to hopefully celebrate our shared humanity and think about world peace.
Hmm. Hmm.
Big ideas, but we're trying. We're trying. And you're the current president of ASIFA Central, the Midwest chapter, so you know exactly what I'm talking about here in terms of our shared
Yeah.
goals for this organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. So having the regional chapters, having the community, I feel like we spoke before, like you sort of carved this path that I've been following now in your footsteps a little bit. So, yeah, having that sense of community is really amazing. And that's a great thing about Ann Arbor is it really provides a sense of community around experimental filmmaking. And how exciting to be a judge this year. How has that been going for you?
Well, we'll see. We have a lot of programs, and there are a lot of short films. In the past, I've been a screener for Ann Arbor, and actually, a number of years I was a super screener because I like to watch films and judge films. But this year, I didn't screen, and then they invited me to be a judge instead. So I get to screen what the super screeners and the screeners selected to put in the program. They have a very deep way of judging films here. It's very democratized. There's a lot of people that get to look at the work. That then it goes through several tiers, and the cut is huge. I don't quite know the real numbers, but I think 3,000, 4,000 films, and in competition is like 110.
Wow.
So, there's a lot of work being made that's funneled down to the small amount of films that are actually in the programs that will be screened and will win awards.
Mhm. Well, it's gonna be a great festival this year. The program looks wonderful. Obviously you've been making Film a Year, which and your website has a great selection of your work. So anybody's interested in taking a look at some of Deanna's work, you can actually watch some of the work via the website. And can you talk a little bit about some of the current projects you've been working on?
Oh, I would love to. Yeah, in terms of the website, one thing I would say is I had three DVDs, and oops, it's upside down. No, it's right. My Eric Earl was the designer of my DVDs, and he also designed a brand new website for me, trying to take the idea of a DVD and how it's interactive and give you that opportunity on the website. And in particular, my DVD Move, Click, Move, which has many, many films on it. He put those on there and included the behind the scenes material. So anyway, I'm very excited about it. We just started launching it like this week, that website. DeannaMorse.com with two N's, DeannaMorse.com. But in terms of my current work, I just finished a film with kids. We were talking to SIFA. SIFA has this project called the Animation Workshop Group, where every year there's a common theme, and different studio or filmmaker teachers work with children around the world to make films around this common theme. And this year, the theme is be what you can be, and you need to work with children who are under 15. And I worked with a group of 10-year-olds, and this is their self-portrait. What we did was we talked to the kids about what is it you want to be, and they drew, they wrote out their ideas of, what they thought that they might be when they grew up, or what they were interested in now. They all have little hearts on them, I must say. That was one thing I was really taken by, was the girls really liked each other and have a lot of hearts and sort of happiness with each other. And, they weren't really thinking that much about what they wanted to be when they're 30. They're just thinking about what they want to be now. So we made little puppets with the girls that allow them to move, click, move, the puppets. And each of the girls made a background of where they thought that they should be. We did these sort of mood color studies, and it ends up with a 2-minute film of 10-year-old energy. It captures, in my opinion, the spirit of what a 10-year-old group of girlfriends are doing at play. And it's sort of funny too, because we only had about 4 hours to actually animate with the girls, and then it took us 2 days to edit the film.
Why was that? Because there was so much footage, or just deciding how things were going to be presented?
There wasn't much footage actually, and we decided we were going to intercut them at play, because we finally had they were animating, and they're in the studio doing this little thing. And then the sun came out and the girls ran outside and played. So it was a combination of live action and animation with these little girls. But anyway, we'll show that, I think, here in the interview. It's called 10, A Moment in Time.
Great. What a wonderful piece. And there is something so special about that 10-year-old girl self, right? That anything is possible, and kind of shifting from childhood to adolescence. So, what a great, great time to capture. Um, in terms of your work in general, you talked a little bit about your motivation being the inspiration of Move, Click, Move, but in a lot of ways, the sequential imagery of your work is a form of visual poetry. On your website, you coin yourself as making poetry. Can you talk a little bit about your visual language and how you sort of interpret that as an artist?
Yeah, it's sort of changed over time. I'm inspired a lot about what's around me, and several of my films have been created when I was an artist in residence at a place like Maitland Art Center, or in the national parks, at the Hot Springs National Park or Everglades National Park, where I put myself in a situation, often in nature, and just sort of explore and experiment with that, whatever is distinctive to that space. It often, for me, has involved native landscaping, flowers, trees. And I also, besides the national parks, it's also my personal space. Like, I made a film, several films actually, that were about my front yard. And then my backyard, the things that you notice on a daily kind of, in your daily life, just sort of trying to smell the flowers, be mindful. I've got a camera actually right now out back that's shooting an ornamental plum tree that's just popping, just starting to pop with pink flowers. Now, this footage may be useful or maybe not, but if it is, that will somehow play in my next film. I'm always kind of sketching and gathering in some way. And some of the material ends up on the cutting room floor, and some of it ends up on the screen.
Yeah, and in a sense, my perception is when you put those images together, you create a sort of architecture of time that the viewer can sort of exist in. So it really does have a very poetic sort of experience on the back end. And then as a woman in film, you've been featured in a range of different books throughout the years, and you're in Women in Animation book, and you were also featured in Animation: A World History, Women in the Limelight. Do you see your role, that sort of perspective, as being prominent part of your work? Do you see this sort of like ecofeminist approach coming through in your perception of your environment that way, in nature?
I do, yeah, I do. I think in a quiet way. I'm not in your face feminist, but I'm a woman working in a male dominated field, so definitely I've always been a feminist, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And pushing for women's rights and girls' rights, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But an artist at heart, right, and not being defined, right, by the roles that we play, but by the essence of who we are. But I think it's important to acknowledge, and as you were talking about it, I was sort of seeing that connection to the 10-year-old girls, right, and the empowering of the self, and really kind of back to your early experience with animation, where you were given that assignment, and through your curiosity actually sparked a whole trajectory of your career, which is really amazing to hear.
Well, thank you. These are really sweet observations, Julian. It also strikes me that part of what both of us do as experimental filmmakers is we get to play. we have this sandbox of tools that we get to play with, like AI that we were talking about earlier, or our little sketchbooks with our little drawings that we do. It gives us a chance to play, not physically play on the swing like the girls, but play in our sandbox of material techniques,
Hmm.
computers.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a great, I mean, it's great to be an artist.
Yeah, and that sense of play, I just, one of your high profile parts of your work is your work for Sesame Street. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because you did bring experimental animation into the mainstream through those pieces.
That's true. And when Sesame Street came out when I was in college, and I always thought that it would be cool to do Sesame Street. And it's kind of a funny story because Karen Aqua, another filmmaker, experimental animator, she told me, "Oh, you should do Sesame Street," and gave me the name and the contact there. And so I sent some of my films in, and the woman who was the producer there wrote back and said, "Oh, no, we don't have any work now, but stay in touch." And I took that as a like blow off. I took it as like, "Oh, well, forget. You're not. There's nothing for you." And then I said to Karen a few years later, "Oh yeah, I got this thing back from her," and she said, "Yeah, there's nothing now, but stay in touch." And Karen said, "That meant stay in touch." So rather than take it as a rejection, it was stay in touch. And then I got back in touch and I ended up becoming one of their, one of their accepted filmmakers, and then proposed ideas. And at that time, their work was very heavily educationally oriented. So you got a big booklet of what the goals had to be that you had to meet. And yeah, it was interesting. It was a very interesting experience working for Sesame Street. I would have continued, but it just didn't work with the academic schedule. Their deadline always was during our finals
Wow.
week. And even if you tried to send your work in earlier, it always seemed like there was too much that hit at one time. But I love the three pieces that I did, and all of them with Rose Rosley and Billy Vitz. So a team of filmmakers doing the Sesame Street work.
And on that note, I mean, I know we're kind of coming up on time here, but have there been filmmakers through the years who've been significantly influential to you, or certain films that you have found inspirational, or artists in general? Yeah.
Totally. Way too many to even mention, but my early inspiration was Norman McLaren from the National Film Board of Canada,
Hmm.
a film artist who explored, and one of the founders of ASIFA, the International Animation Group, too. So sort of following in his footsteps there. But Norman McLaren definitely inspired my work. And a lot of contemporary filmmakers are doing very interesting things too. So I guess if I had to make a list, people say like pick your top four. You mean my top 400?
Or let's talk styles, just in terms of your sort of the style of your work. Where do you see your inspiration coming from in terms of your approach to animation and your visual style?
Yeah. Well, I like things that move very, very slow or very, very fast. And kinesthesis is definitely inspirational to me. The idea that you can take a frame and then the next frame and then the next frame and then the next frame. And it's not the individual images, it's the change between the two, those frames that makes the motion. And it's kind of nerve-wracking for a lot of people. They don't like that flashy stuff, but I find it just entrancing. I love kinesthesis films,
Mm-hmm.
quick cutting. And then I like things that are very, very slow too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that harkens to persistence of vision, right? The optical process that happens in the human brain where we stitch the images together to create the illusion of motion. I always tell students it's not really moving, it's just moving in your head, right? We look at it. It's
Yeah.
just a sequence of images or electrical impulses or whatever the vibration of energy it would be. Well,
And Oliver Sacks talked about that, I remember, in the perception of time, and that if you, I mean, some people that have like a brain problem or something, they don't see the lighting of the pipe as a fluid motion, but it's this, and there's something about the way that we animate that has a spirit of that too.
mhm, mhm.
Of, anyway, I really like Oliver Sacks, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. People have read that,
Uh-huh,
yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, is there anything else that you'd like to say to the Ann Arbor viewing audience, or anything that in closing that you want to, that I may have not touched on so far?
I don't know. I think it's just going to be a great week of connecting with each other and connecting with films and connecting with each other through films. It's going to be a really inspiring week. And and I'm looking forward to seeing you in person too, Julie, and talking more about AI,
Sounds great. And
your new passion.
great group of judges. And again, I've truly honored to have the opportunity to interview you and capture this moment in time, for your work, and for your contribution as a judge. It's Festival's very lucky to have you. So,
Thank you, Julie. Me too. I feel the same way. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you soon, and thanks for the interview.
bye. Thank you.